Okay, looks like we have a critical mass with us. So we're going to kick off this virtual session on building lasting climate resilience. So welcome everybody. Just to make sure you're in the right place. This is our webinar on building lasting climate resilience. My name is David Nicholson. I am the Chief Climate Officer here at Mercy Corps. I see some familiar names in the list here. So for those that I know, it's nice to see your names again. And those new to Mercy Corps, welcome. I've been with Mercy Corps for around 12 years, and I've been a part of our efforts to, continue to build our climate change focused portfolio and sort of grapple with the realities of climate change on the work that we do. My current role as Chief Climate Officer is really a broad-based role to ensure that as an organization, we are as impactful as possible in the face of the climate crisis. And I get to work with colleagues across the board from our programming to our policy and influence work to our fundraising and all other elements to ensure that we are the best we can possibly be in the face of this sort of all-encompassing and new crisis. The good news is you won't just be hearing from me today. I have a close colleague and co-conspirator here in Cecilia Ragazzi. Cecilia is one of our many very creative brains that helps drive a lot of our climate work, and her work is specifically on our clean energy portfolio. And I'm just going to hand over to Cecilia to introduce herself quickly.
Sure. Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Cecilia Ragazzi, and I'm a Mercy Corps Director for Energy Access. I'm based in our European HQ, and in my role, I provide the strategic direction for everything energy access related. So I hope that throughout our conversation today, we will discover that for us at Mercy Corps, energy access and renewable energy specifically, it's really not an end on its own, but it's a way on how we power actually both our development and humanitarian work. For us, renewable energy is really a tool that supports both climate mitigation, but especially climate adaptation. And I think that throughout our chat together today, David, we will be able to share a couple of examples. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Celia. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to frame up Mercy Corps' work and tell you a little bit about our climate work specifically, and then Cecilia will give us do a deep dive into one of our programs that I think tells a really good story of the sorts of things Mercy Corps is trying to do. We will keep plenty of time at the end for questions. So there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Hopefully you can see. So please feel free to drop questions into there, and we will respond to them towards the end of this session. But let me just start with a few words on Mercy Corps as an institution. For those who don't know much about us, Cecilia and I have around 6,000 colleagues around the world in current count is 42 countries. These are humanitarian workers, largely from the countries that, working in the countries that they're from, responding to the critical humanitarian crises of our time. And, certainly these are people experiencing poverty, extreme weather events, violent conflict, and increasingly the sort of complex array of crises that climate change brings. In the last year, we reached about 30 million people with our work, and we tend to organize our work into 4 main outcomes that we seek, and these outcomes are integrated with one another. But to give you a sense of those, we look for outcomes in food security and water security, peace and good governance, and economic opportunity. And as I say, we see these things as interrelated goals that we think together, when achieved in a certain way, certainly build what we try to seek as resilient communities that can not only withstand these sort of dual crises of climate change and conflict, but also sort of make progress towards development outcomes despite facing these kinds of challenges. And this dual crisis of conflict and climate change is something we've been increasingly focused on as an organization. These are the risks that we see communities facing and the things that are driving, the negative impacts that we see, whether it's, conflict heavy events that we're seeing currently in places like Gaza and Sudan and Ukraine, or the large number of acute weather events or seasonal changes that are really driving negative economic and social impacts in places we work. So I want to touch a little bit on climate change specifically. That is my role and background, and I think that's the thrust of this conversation today. And we know climate change doesn't impact everybody equally, right? It affects everyone in the world, but it doesn't affect everybody equally. And the reality is those least responsible for the crisis are the most impacted. And, they're the most impacted by extreme weather events that we see. I don't know if anyone's been watching this week, these big flooding events that we've seen in multiple countries, including some in Spain, with really some astounding images coming out of there. But just changing rainfall patterns and changing weather patterns that can really impact livelihoods, particularly those who are very, very reliant on the land for their livelihoods. And that is true in many cases that we work. Those of us in wealthier countries are a little more insulated from those changing weather patterns. But if you're growing your own food and that season changes, then it is a major risk for you. So Mercy Corps works, we respond to these extreme weather events and also try and find what are the innovative solutions? Where can we bring adaptation solutions to communities to help them cope and adapt and ultimately thrive within these changing conditions? And, Mercy Corps has been working for over 4 decades with local communities, trying to seek, innovative solutions to very complex challenges. And the climate crisis just adds another layer of this set of these complex challenges. We focus on helping people respond quickly to crises and then, build more resilient communities as we recover from those shocks. When I joined Mercy Corps, climate change was on the agenda, but only peripherally and only in certain places. And, during my 12 years, we've seen this idea of climate adaptation and resilience really grow as we see these risks. We don't have to convince people in the places that we work that climate change is a problem. The most articulate and clear-eyed descriptions of the climate crisis come very often out of farmers or pastoralists in the countries that we work in. But trying to figure out what those adaptation solutions look like and how can we help advance them at the household level, at the business level, at the municipal government level is something that we're very focused on. And using our platform and our programs and the talents of our local team members to, help identify and nurture those solutions. I just want to touch a little bit on what exactly we mean by adaptation, because it's, one of these buzzwords, but, stepping back and looking at it from the 50,000-foot level, the climate change means conditions are changing. So people have to change, all of us have to change our lives, our livelihoods, our economic systems around that. So when we think about adaptation, we think about what are the risks that our communities, specific risks that communities are facing. What does climate change manifest as at the local level? And then what needs to change in order for people to do things differently in a way that will enable them to have successful lives. And that looks very different in all the places that we work. But we realize that as this crisis expands, that our failure to decarbonize quickly enough means that adaptation is even, more and more important. The ship has sailed on helping, avoiding some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis, particularly on those on the front lines. So, the adaptation has never been more important and will continue to be so. We've been doing this work for quite a long time, and we've been gathering evidence base and a deeper understanding of what works for adaptation, because that's something that's been missing for a while. But I think, over the last decade at Mercy Corps, we certainly have gathered a pretty good idea of how to do good adaptation work and what sort of innovations are needed in different places. And we also know we need to be different as an organization. The whole humanitarian system was set up to respond to defined crises that are usually time-bound and geographically constrained. That is not the climate crisis. So we need to be different. And we need to be able to see our role as sparking and catalyzing innovation and being a partner to local actors who are the ones driving those solutions over the long term. And one of my priorities as Chief Climate Officer is to help us raise the kind of flexible funding we need to be that creative partner to our local actors and local communities. And that's why last year we launched our $250 million Climate Possible campaign. This is an effort to raise that sort of more flexible money that we can invest in solutions that we think can scale for climate adaptation across the portfolio of countries that we work in. And we think about our campaign in a couple of areas. The first pillar of priority is how do we make sure that we have proactive and rapid action to help communities cope with climate-related disasters. We know they're going to happen. Small scale, large scale, extreme weather events are going to happen, are happening. So we need to make sure that the combination of early warning systems, preparedness, and also rapid response systems are available to make sure that people can cope with those as well as possible. This might be certainly the early warning is a fundamental part of this work, but also our ability to make sure we can get cash into the hands of people after a disaster quickly or other sorts of goods that are needed, to make sure that emergency response component is really is there and ready to go, and that we don't have to try and raise money after an event because these events are happening with such high frequency. So that's the first pillar of our campaign work. The second pillar is on these sustainable long-term solutions to help communities adapt to climate change. We think about, there's two areas we're particularly focused on. One is on climate smart agriculture. It's all sorts of technology, different agricultural approaches to ensure that nutritious food can be grown in among a more dynamic climate. And we want to make sure that those techniques and opportunities are available to the communities we work with. And the second one is unlocking access to affordable renewable energy. There's a clean energy revolution out there. The transition is happening rapidly, but it is not reaching everybody. And we see clean energy not only as a tool for decarbonization, but for us, more importantly, it supports adaptation. It enables communities to thrive in a changing environment. And this is an area of innovation that we think there's a lot of opportunity to bring to bear in the places that we work. So fully funded with our campaign, we aim to reach 12.5 million people with climate smart solutions and 20 million people more through high impact climate startups, just to give you a sense of the scale that we're after. But with that summary, we're now going to dig into the clean energy pillar specifically, which is one where I think there's so much innovation and there's just a ton of interesting stories out there from the Mercy Corps world and from our partners and from other organizations as well. But there's one particular version of this that we want to focus in on today. So with that, Cecilia, I will hand to you.
All right. Thank you, David. Right. So before jumping into a specific program that I think that really illustrates quite well this narrative whereby clean, renewable, and affordable energy access becomes really a catalytic factor for people to improve their living conditions and economic opportunities. I'd like just to take probably 1.5 minutes to give you a quick background on myself personally. So as I said, I'm now based in our European HQ, but I would say that the bulk of my career has been in the places where actually we implement the work that Mercy Corps does, and specifically in humanitarian settings. So I spent about 11 years in places of crisis defined both by conflict, but also climate change. And again, as David just said, the two, of course, like very often interlink, right? And my personal background is actually on social inclusion and specifically on female economic empowerment. So it was while I was doing my job that I actually came across a program that was implemented in 3 countries in the Sahel. Again, a specific geographical context that is clearly affected by both conflict and climate change. This specific program that I had the honor to actually implement was about female economic opportunity through renewable energy. And it was through this program that I got completely hooked on renewable energy as a sector per se, because I could really touch and grasp with my hand how renewable energy becomes really a clear, immediate way for vulnerable populations, in this case specifically women and young women, to actually improve not only their living conditions, think about accessing light when everything around you is actually dark, increasing, of course, your personal sense of safety, but also throughout the day, increasing the opportunity that you could have to run a business, or simply really to have like those sort of like comforts in your daily life that definitely would make you happier. And I thought that for me that was really the next step in my career. And I was very lucky because I found in Mercy Corps, of course, a place where I could grow this personal interest by in a very innovative way. So the innovation that we are able to implement at Mercy Corps is really to, I think, leverage what is one of the key DNA elements of our organization, which is that sort of entrepreneurial spirit that builds both on a partnership with the private sector actors, but also with financial institutions. Now, why these specific approaches for us are so important. It's, I think, somehow rooted in a sense of humbleness. So, as a humanitarian and development organization, we realize that, of course, it's not at the core of our job to actually go down in a site, pull lines, install solar PV systems, and inverters, batteries, and all the rest of it. There are private sector companies that, of course, do that as their job, and they're able to provide a high quality standards type of services in this sector. And again, it wouldn't be our best interest to disrupt market potentials in those communities. So we want, of course, to let private sector energy companies to do their work. On the other hand, we will also, of course, realize that not everybody in the communities where we work can afford this type of energy equipment or energy services. Therefore, those partnerships with financial institutions that can indeed support the client base to acquire these energy services and products is so fundamental. Now, again, I'm terribly lucky to work for Mercy Corps, where these ideas can indeed be tested. But we were also very lucky because we got initial seed funding from a philanthropic donor. And philanthropic funding is actually for us so key because it's way more flexible than institutional funding, where very often donors would have, of course, their priorities that are defined either by governance or by their key stakeholders. With philanthropic money, we feel that we can really test more. We are allowed sometimes, of course, also to make mistakes and learn from our failures to then pivot and to implement better. And this implementation, this design is always very much shared with our partners. Again, private sector, financial institutions, but of course, first and foremost, the communities we work with, right? So it's throughout this initial funding that we were able indeed to design an initiative which is basically our flagship energy access program in situations of displacement that is called Enter Energy. So Enter Energy is an initiative that tries to match on one side the demand for energy services with the supply of these energy services. Again, the end goal here is not just to put a plug in the wall of households of vulnerable communities or the businesses that they're in, but it's really to provide them an opportunity to increase their economic opportunities, to increase their quality of life. And it took us a long time, to be honest, to both conceptualize and then start implementing step by step this program. We started first and foremost with a market assessment. Throughout the market assessment, we were identifying the sort of energy needs and requirements, also like the aspirational use of energy that people wanted to do in the places that we were assessing at that very initial phase, right? And throughout this assessment, we were able then to sort of funnel down the type of locations that we wanted to test for a really like us to be able to run these programs. Again, we saw throughout this initial scoping phase that again those elements of conflict and climate change were so predominant in these communities that for us it's absolutely clear how renewable energy can become a tool to support communities to face a changing climate, diversifying their income sources, for instance, but also giving the hosting communities that are around these displacement settings that we are serving with renewable energy, with alternative ways for their livelihood. So, David, I hope that this intro to the program, the Enter Energy Initiative, is clear, and I'll be very happy also to just continue our chat together.
Great, thanks, Cecilia. I think, as you know, the Enter Energy program is one of my favorite examples of Mercy Corps kind of taking a hard challenge and finding a new solution for that. And it's taken some time to get to the point where we're able to start really seeing impact. You and I were there together recently. Maybe you could just paint a picture of being in Shedder Camp and the impact that we saw in that first the first phase of the program.
Yes, I can definitely do that. We actually had a couple of pictures for the audience. I don't know if the technology is with us today to allow to share them. Yeah, I think that they're coming through. And while they come through, had actually the pleasure to go in this specific camp where we are implementing a version of Enter Energy quite a few times. So again, like from the real beginning of this assessment throughout the phase where right now we are actually already providing a clean energy to about 1,000 households, and think of that each household would have normally 6 to 7 members. So the numbers are really already quite impressive. So this is the type of place. So this is the Shedder community. As you can see, it's quite rural, really pretty, but again, quite affected by climate change. So you would see in this area periods of drought that are followed by floods, because of course the two phenomena are often related. And if you go into the next slide, please, you would see the main marketplace of the Shedder camp. So Shedder is hosting about 1,200 households for the time being. Again, keep in mind 6 to 7 people living per household. These refugees are actually coming from Somalia, and there's a huge entrepreneurial spirit among this community. What you see here is actually the main market street, right? And you can see already there are poles with electricity, and this electricity is actually provided by a mini grid, which is represented in the next slide, that Mercy Corps inaugurated at the beginning of this year. Now, we inaugurated this mini grid through a partnership with a company that is called Humanitarian Energy PLC, that has been incorporated by Mercy Corps specifically in Ethiopia to support and spur that clean energy market that is so nascent still in Ethiopia. Now, again, as I said before, Mercy Corps really promotes innovation, and among the innovation was also like allowing us to incorporate energy company that actually is serving both refugees and host communities, but also humanitarian operations. So also supporting really that decarbonization movement that rightly so is quite central throughout the humanitarian world right now, and Mercy Corps is one of the champions of this movement. So if you go on the next slide. Yeah, we can see here a little bit the layout. So this is the mini grid that Humanitarian Energy PLC inaugurated with Mercy Corps, and it's serving indeed this productive center that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, that indeed supports both host communities and refugee businesses. And these businesses are really, really varied. They span from millers that are providing flour both for the refugees and host community market. We also have welders, so we have carpenters, we have again like a vast array of businesses. But if we go on the next slide, we can also see actually some of the smaller businesses that are run at household level. Again, like my personal background, my personal passion is really female empowerment, right? And we saw how through accessing renewable energy, women could really improve their home run businesses. So the woman that you see at the center of this slide, her name is Amina. So Amina before was already selling small things in our doorsteps basically, and she was so pleased to be able to actually purchase cleaner, renewable, reliable energy because she could start improving her revenues, and she did that by buying a couple of blenders that you can see in these pictures. She makes a fantastic juice, and she's also charging phones for the neighbors' households. And again, like she gets a small fees, but she basically tells us that for her getting into the connection was absolutely a no-brainer. So people are asked to contribute to a $20 connection fee to be able to start using the electricity that mini-grid provides. She said that for her it was a no-brainer, like because of the new business that she was able to put in place, she could collect that amount of money in just a couple of days, and all the rest for her it was just like a good revenue that could support her family. If you go in the next slide. Thank you. You can actually see a couple of us, David and myself included, enjoying a glass of these very refreshing juice that Amina was making for us that day. She also sells, of course, cold drinks. She has the possibility to rent actually her fridges. Again, like the entrepreneurial spirit of these people is just like incredible. It's so good to see. Again, like she rents a space in her fridge for a neighbor, so to just be able to refrigerate the goods, right? If you go on the next slide. This is another small business that was able just to flourish thanks to the energy that the mini grid provided. In this picture, you have Kadir, who's the guy that you see in the background, that is actually running a very cool shop that spans from photo, so he's taking pictures, and these pictures, of course, like are used also for official documentations, but also really like for fun, like social media and things like that, right? So is running both of these photo booth, but at the same time is also able to run small videos and things like that. And again, like I think that the female participation in this shop for me was really like so uplifting to see. Like he has as many female clients as male clients, and it was great. If you go to the next picture. Yeah, you can actually see here the sort of like a cinema plus PlayStation location that another guy, Osman, is running. On the screen, like it's impossible to see it there, but actually it was the Euro final that was showing. So yeah, Italy, where I'm from, didn't do very well. But it was actually a pure joy to see how much people were enjoying it. It's a sort of social gathering, right? Again, like I think about the massive impact that having the possibility to get together with your friends, with your family when outside is dark, like it was starking. So yeah, these people were really taking like the best opportunity of the electricity that they were able to access. I think that, yeah, David, that is in terms of like the lived stories that we had the opportunity to see firsthand.
Great, thanks, Cecilia. And I really appreciate, and this, as I say, I was lucky enough to be there with you earlier this year, and it was definitely one of the more meaningful experiences of seeing that work coming to fruition in such a positive way. I just want to stick with this project for one more second, and then we'll pivot to some of the questions we've been coming in. But we've zoomed in there to some very real human stories of what happens in a single site. One of the things that I like about this program is its potential for scale. We've identified this sort of interesting paradox within informal settlements and displaced people settlements, where you have people who are living in settlements which are supposed to be temporary but end up being there for years, if not decades in many cases. And actually, they're pretty good. They're pretty appealing sites for off-grid energy, because you do end up with quite a dense population, and there tends to be a pretty reasonable amount of energy demand when you combine all these small businesses with humanitarian operations and other things like that. So, there is a model here that we think is an efficient use of funding, and we think can really scale. And as we see the climate crisis grow, these sort of informal settlements are going to increase as people are on the move. So give us a sense of this scale. How are we thinking about scaling this program, and how, what's its potential?
Absolutely. Again, through this initial philanthropic funding, we wanted to test a model, right? But we really saw that the model can work. Of course, there are some preconditions that needs to be in place, but the model can work. And as you said, the scale of the need is massive. Currently, there are 140 million displaced people around the world. This number just doubled if you think about 10 years ago. And unfortunately, the projections is not going to improve. So we have a sheer need to be able to support what are becoming increasingly protracted situations of displacement in a way that is not just time-bound and linked to those funding cycles that very often through institutional funding are probably linked to 1 or 2 years at the maximum. Now, what we can do with the Anti-Energy Initiative is indeed to start solarizing with mini grids, additional camps. We now have already complete engineering for 3 additional sites that are actually covering 130,000 people in Ethiopia alone. And we actually are currently fundraising, and we have received already seed funding for this expansion. And again, it's an expansion that is proven to work. Like the context is very similar to what we just illustrated right now. But the Anti-Energy Initiative is actually already expanding also outside Ethiopia. We're already electrifying a relocation site in Somalia, in the outskirts of one of the main cities called Baidoa. This is a relocation site that is hosting internally displaced people, which is called Barwako. And in Barwako, we are again testing that model in a new context, supplying the opportunity to connect it to renewable energy for 13,000 people. We are also expanding the model in Uganda. And in Uganda, we have the ambition. Uganda is a very favorable market for private sector on one hand, but also very welcoming of refugees. And in Uganda, we actually have an ambition to have a nationwide program that can support electrification through renewable energy of displacement settings. We are currently also expanding in Jordan and in Mozambique. Again, 2 very different contexts, but again, so much affected by climate change. We can really draw some parallels between these 2 countries. And again, that offers, I think, just like a little taster of the type of expansion that we have in mind.
Great. Thanks, Cecilia. And again, to emphasize the point, these sorts of models do not get off the ground without private philanthropy. We were able to really work with corporate and philanthropic actors to test, evolve, run into a couple of dead ends and reconsider the model as we went. And that's an incredibly valuable piece of the equation. Got a couple of questions that have come through, Cecilia, on energy work specifically. So you're going to stay on the spot here for a moment. Let me pose both together. The first one is about just wanting to hear more, stepping back from the specifics of the displacement settings. Somebody's asking to share more about how the lack of electricity and energy service affects vulnerable people in various contexts that within we work. So why is energy access so important, and how does energy poverty affect people negatively? And then a secondary question here is, what are the risks with some of this distributed power? What are the downsides with using solar battery systems? Are there, how do we account for, maybe weather events or other risks to them not working at some point in the future? So if you can address those two, please.
Both excellent questions. I'll probably start by the last one, and I hope I remember the first one. In case, please, David, bring me back. So in terms of the vulnerability of the renewable energy infrastructure itself vis-a-vis climate shocks. Now, of course, there's an element of that. Infrastructure is, of course, vulnerable to climate events. However, one of the beauties of being able to work through decentralized renewable energy is the fact that these infrastructure are often quite small, in the sense that either can really be maneuvered around. So we actually work with plenty of private sector solutions that propose containerized solution that can be indeed be displaced. But at the same time, once the weather effect indeed impact the infrastructure, is way easier to go back and solve the issue. Now, we've seen this phenomenon times and times again in the Caribbean, where we are not deploying the Inter-Energy Initiative per se, but we are working with what we call resilience hubs. So these are community centers that are electrified through solar panels, and these are throughout the year. So throughout the year, the community center is able to collect the revenues that will then run the operations. And indeed, like these major replace and maintenance moments that occur quite frequently because of course, the hurricane season in the Caribbean. So now we see that the type of getting back after the climate shock has happened for decentralized renewable energy infrastructure is way quicker than the main grid. We have locations that even after the Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico are still waiting to get back on the main grid. However, our decentralized renewable energy infrastructure were able to kick back after a couple of weeks of the event. So in that sense, I would say that the technology is way more nimble than bigger infrastructure and can stand weather events in a much stronger way. Now, and I hope that is enough. If you need any further clarification, of course, I'm very happy to try to dig deeper. The first question, I guess, that was about vulnerability, right? So clear example of how population that are already vulnerable are increased more vulnerable because of the lack of renewable energy. Now, again, like I think I gave a couple of examples, but I'm super happy to expand further. Think about, for instance, like in our daily life, not being able to access energy, right? And that goes, again, like for women and children, in terms of safety and security after dark, it's very risky to actually go around. So one is like this aspect of a perceived and actual sense of safety. We've seen that in many of the locations where we're looking at settlements, for instance, families would not have toilets in their households, right? They would share common water points or latrines that require for people, of course, to walk toward that type of infrastructure. Now, of course, at night, without having light, this type of journey becomes incredibly dangerous. There are studies after studies that demonstrate that lack of lighting in refugee camps actually sparks the risk of sexual violence in refugee camps themselves. So one example is clearly this. On the other hand, as I think that I mentioned before, not having energy access increases vulnerability vis-a-vis the opportunity to earn an income. Think about the possibility, of course, again, if you have like a small shop, again, this can be like a woman-led type of shop at the doorstep of your house. If you don't have the possibility of having a light, your business activities terminate once the sun goes down again. But at the same time, it's also like the variety of businesses that you can run while you're at home. Again, like the story of Amina, for instance, is quite clear. I think like she was able to diversify the type of offering toward her clients. Now she has blenders, so she can make juices, she can make like different type of products. She's charging a phone, she's renting her fridge. There's a really like this sort of like an entrepreneurship that can really flourish because of energy access. Again, these millers that we are powering in the refugee camps in Cheddar that I just mentioned to you before, before they were running their operation through diesel gensets. So it's not that they didn't have access to energy, they had energy access, but the type of energy that could access was, first of all, very expensive, but diesel prices in Cheddar are absolutely crazy. And they are increasing like almost month on month, and diesel actually is getting like quite scarce in that specific area. But at the same time, the type of generators that they were running, of course, was incredibly inefficient. Like I have other pictures, and I would be happy to share with you after this call as well. You should see like the status of their workshop, like a completely black, like the flour that these people were actually milling was black, and that was due to the particulate matter that was deriving from burning diesel to run the gensets. Now, not only they can mill more flour, and of course that is increase the revenues for these millers, but also their quality of working life is incredibly better. Like they are really pleased with how healthier the environment is for them. Again, David, like plenty more of examples, of course, and
We've got
I'll be
some.
happy also to take it offline through email, whatever.
Great, thanks, Cecilia. I'll give you a break. There's a few questions coming in that I will awkwardly pose to myself and respond to, and then we may well come back to you. Lisa, I see a final follow-up question there on battery uses, and I'll just address very quickly that yes, batteries are a hugely important part of the off-grid energy puzzle, and they've improved a ton in recent years, and there's a lot more people making batteries for the kinds of conditions and environments we work in, so we're seeing great improvement in that. And there's probably been more improvement in the battery and storage technology than there has been in the energy capture in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and it's been a big driver of the progress that we see. So just to respond to that one quickly. We had an anonymous question here about the opening statement that I made around getting cash to people right away, and why cash, and why wouldn't we focus on other kinds of support like food and housing? It's a really good question, and so let me speak to that as a part of how we think about our emergency response. First of all, every crisis is different. So it's important for us to very quickly understand what are the needs of people as quickly as possible before we go in with our response strategy. However, over the years and over the last decade, Mercy Corps has been increasingly focusing on cash or digital voucher distributions of some sort as a centerpiece of responses. And that's based on a lot of research done by ourselves and by other organizations that show in many cases that is the most effective way to help people recover most quickly from shocks. It enables local market systems to get back on their feet really quickly if there are paying customers with money available. And though, businesses that might be adjacent to the area effective can come to the area more effectively and in a more agile manner than sort of the big humanitarian infrastructure having to ship in food and things from halfway across the world in many cases. So there's an agile nature and a system strengthening feature of cash and vouchers that we find very appealing. That doesn't mean that it's relevant in all cases. Of course, it relies upon that ability for local market systems to exist, and at a certain scale of crisis, that of course is not possible. So it's really important that we understand very quickly from our teams on the ground whether cash is an appropriate tool for that early recovery. But I would say more often than not these days, we see that as the best approach to helping people respond most quickly. So that addresses, just to address that question. I wanted to pivot a little bit to talk about climate solutions generally. There was a question here about how we work with local partners specifically for climate action. And this is a really important part of how we think about our climate work. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that. You know, if you listen to people doing, humanitarian and development work at any time in the last 30 years, there would have been some discussion about how important locally led solutions are. I think the reality is the system wasn't always well set up to truly nurture those local solutions and ensure that sort of power and decision making was truly local for many reasons, and some of that's just the system within which we're operating and the kinds of how quickly the money had to be spent in these areas. So it's always been an objective and an aspiration, and many times successful. But climate crisis has really put this idea of locally led solutions at the very core of how we think about our work, and I think in a really positive way. There's a few reasons for that. The main one being the climate crisis isn't going anywhere. So in the part, if you want solutions to be lasting in a particular place, they cannot be owned and led by international nonprofits or other external institutions. We are not dealing, if you're working in, a context like northern Nigeria, which sees these cycles of drought, flood, conflict that is exacerbated by extreme weather events and a very complicated dynamic, those conditions are going to worsen. So any solutions, any adaptations that will happen in a place like that need to be fully owned and led in that context, because you can't rely on external actors to be doing that. So, we've really brought this at the very core of what we do. We also recognize that the proximity of solutions is really important, right? Context really matters for climate change. We talk at climate change at the macro level, and we know the temperature changes at the macro level, or flood and drought cycles, but the risks manifest very specifically in different places depending on the nature of the topography of the land, the nature of the livelihood mix. What do people do and how are they exposed to that? So the solutions have to be truly grounded in those environments. I'm going to give a couple of examples of how we do this related to our climate information services work, which is, if weather patterns are changing, and a really important part of adaptation is that people have information, both early warning for extreme events, but also just seasonal forecasts of how things will be different so that they can make different decisions. It goes back to this idea that adaptation means doing something differently. So we do a lot of work on this climate information services. There's a ton of advancement in quality of seasonal forecasts and early warning ability, but getting that information into the hands of people at the right time to make decisions is really challenging, and something that Mercy Corps our colleagues spend a lot of time thinking about. So one way of working with local partners is actually through municipal governments. The year before last, I was in Wajir in northern Kenya, which was at ended up being the tail end of a very extreme drought period. It was 6 failed rainy seasons, tens of thousands of dead livestock, crop failure, mass migration of people to other parts of the country to find water sources with animals that itself was causing conflict. So it was a really pretty extreme version of the climate crisis for that sort of environment. And something we were doing there was we had been working there for actually several decades and had really strong community links. And we've been working with rangeland councils to help them access and interpret climate information so they can make decisions about grazing land and things like that. But a really important partnership that struck me was with that municipal government, which Wajir County, is about 1.5 million people living in this county in Kenya. There is a county government. And we worked very closely to build out their GIS capacity so that there was a GIS lab, an information systems lab within the municipal building that can bring in the right data, send out information to people in that county and help with decision making. And we did a lot of stuff in the background of making sure that equipment could be purchased, could be maintained, could be understood. People were trained on how to use it. People had access to the right sort of information systems at a global scale that they could bring down and downscale appropriately to that level. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in the background as really capacity building to enable a super important institution, which is a municipal government, to play a role in providing weather and climate information to their constituents at an ongoing basis. And that is now up and running. We are providing light touch support, but the municipal government is the key actor for that activity in the county. And I think that's really, really important. Another example where we've been looking at digital solutions for smallholder farmers for climate and weather information. We have a program called AgriFin, which works in multiple countries across sub-Saharan Africa that does a lot of bundling of digital services that together can support smallholder farmers. Some of them are insurance products, some of them are information services, some of them are different sorts of financial services. They're reaching 3 or 4 million people with climate, not only climate and weather information, but sort of farming advice, when to plant, what to plant, given the changing conditions. But we don't, it's not, you just sending texts out into the ether don't really get you there. So what that team does is works with farmer-facing organization, cooperatives. Usually they're working with about 100 of these different cooperatives across sub-Saharan Africa who themselves have real-time connection to their groups of farmers. So the cooperatives are the farmer-facing. They're the ones that interact directly with the farmers. Mercy Corps creates this system in the background through which we can make sure that they have the access, the information, and the ability to provide that information out to those farmers. So there's a couple of ways that we try and make sure that local capacity and the local leaders are playing the key roles in climate adaptation. Excuse me a minute. I have a final question here, and I think before we wrap up, is how Mercy Corps' work might stand out from our peers. What is it that we do differently to others that we think is worth highlighting? Cecilia, I'm going to ask you to answer that, and then I will add my own version of that as well. So over to you.
Yeah, again, I think that I said it already. I think that one of the joys of working at the Mercy Corps is that entrepreneurial spirit. Again, like building those strong partnerships with other companies, organizations that know exactly what they are doing and try to find ways to actually maximize our own impact. Again, for me, it's essential to be able to work with private sector companies through financial models as well that can ensure that longer term visibility and sustainability of the programs that we implement. So for me, it's really like that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. I don't know for you, David.
Yeah, let me build on that a little bit, because I think there's a culture at Mercy Corps that believes quite strongly that in many cases there are market-based solutions to some of these challenges. And I think when it comes to adaptation and resilience, that's still a relatively niche viewpoint. I think a lot of adaptation work is, public good based and has to be, publicly funded. But there are a significant subsets of adaptation solutions that can be commercially driven, can be private sector driven with the right kind of smart subsidies. And I think Mercy Corps is leaning quite heavily and I think probably pushing a lot harder than many of our peers in identifying those, working with those local business owners or innovators across the spectrum of stakeholders that we think can build solutions that can really scale through market systems. It's a really positive part of what we do. Mercy Corps has a venture fund that actually provides early stage equity, seed capital into these startups that are emerging all around the world, that have solutions that can provide a piece of the puzzle for an adaptation. Adaptation has to be all encompassing. There's lots and lots of things that have to happen at once, but they're identifying particular opportunities where startup enterprises can provide those solutions, whether they're in things like microinsurance models or payment systems that enable people to access more renewable energy for refrigeration and water pumping, or early warning systems of various kinds, off-grid irrigation pumping. There's lots and lots of these solutions that we see commercial models evolving around, and Mercy Corps Ventures is one example of the tools that we have to advance those kinds of business solutions that I think is unique among our peers, something that we believe quite passionately in as part of a portfolio of solutions. So I think that's what I would respond to there. we're getting towards the end of our hour together, so I think we will draw this to a close. We really, really appreciate you guys joining us today for this discussion. And please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything else you would like to follow up on or would like more information. We're happy to share. So Cecilia, I will say thank you to you.
Thank you, David, and thank
And
you to all the attendees.
I hope wherever you are in the world, everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you.